A lot of information today, but in a way, not really a lot. So the defense rested earlier today. Nothing really came out of the testimony prior to defense resting, but they did rest their case. And now the state is doing a little bit of redirect um, by calling a couple of witnesses. The first was that, and that was by 9:30. By 9:30, the defense had rested. Normally once the defense rests, the case is over, unless because the state has another option when they're going after you, or the plaintiff in a civil case has an extra opportunity to present evidence, and that kind of back and forth. Think of it as like overtime. So once each team has laid out an equal case, the home team essentially has the ability to once again score, and then if they do, then the defense. But in legal trials, the plaintiff generally, or the state, has an extra opportunity. So after this, the defense could say, "Oh, you know what? We do want to call more witnesses," and then the state would be able to finish out or not finish out, and do another redirect. So that's what happened today. The state is doing a redirect. They called, well, now, not Chief, right? No, not Chief, but Randall Eads, and he was the assistant training coordinator in armor for Temple PD when DeCruz graduated from the police academy in 2011. He talked largely about firearm safety, and these are things that are not only taught in the academies and throughout an officer's career, allegedly, but these are things that are taught. Hey, Lou, keeping the swine in line, and beans and roots. How y'all doing? But also, it's what civilians teach. All of these rules, and so he went over um, the rules that are ingrained and beaten into officers during firearms safety, because this was one of the training guys that did firearms training, like never point in the direction of another person, or in other words, never point at something that you don't want to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to pull the trigger. At that point, if you're going to pass a gun to somebody, make sure it's unloaded first. Check behind the target to make sure that you're not endangering others behind what it is you intend to shoot. Always maintain muzzle awareness. Look at where, maintain where your barrel is pointed, because you don't want to point it at something, again, that you're not intending to destroy. So you always have to have that muzzle awareness. And the two things that they stressed the most, he said in this testimony, was the two most important things. The most important thing is finger off the trigger, because it doesn't matter how many safeties a gun has, or if the gun has none. It's always, every single firearm in the world has one for sure safety. This is your first safety. So if your gun only has a little flip switch, that from safe to semi or whatever, for an AR-15, safe to semi, or for my 1911, safe to semi, that's your second safety, because this is your first safety. Okay. And the thing he said was that, the gun, especially a Glock 22, which is what's here, it will not go off because it's got mechanical safeties. It's got a trigger safety, and it's also got an internal mechanical safety that unless the trigger is depressed, the gun can't fire, because there is I don't know if it's a pin or a rod or something, but there's something that goes up, and I don't know what the official name is because I'm not a Glock guy. Actually, I don't even know what it is at a 1911. I'm a 1911 guy. But and it prevents, unless the trigger is depressed, it prevents that striker, the firing pin, from going forward, and it kind of sticks up in a little notch there. And when you pull the trigger, that notch comes down, allowing the firing pin to move as you pull the trigger. So he testified that the Glock 22 cannot fire unless there's some mechanical problem with it, and this gun had no mechanical problems. It cannot fire without the trigger being pulled. So this idea that the gun just malfunctioned or whatever, Can't happen. The trigger had to be pulled. All right. And then next up today was Chief Hunt. He was a former lieutenant with Temple PD. He took over traffic control the night of this incident, but more importantly, he was a trainer at the academy and teaching patrol techniques on, for example, when you pull somebody over, maintaining a correct distance. And there's like a 7-step approach to pulling someone over. So first, you safely position your vehicle behind the subject. You approach generally on the passenger side. When you pull your vehicle up behind the subject, you want to kind of make sure that your hood ornament or the center of your vehicle is aligned with the left tail light of the suspect vehicle, and that gives you about 2 feet or so of cover in case something does happen. You've got some cover there on the driver's side, of course, but you're going to be on the passenger side. And he talked about introduce yourself, explain the violation that's committed. You ask for the driver's license and insurance, and this is just any normal traffic stop. And then you do everything with your non-dominant hand. So if you're like me, a left-handed shooter, you grab all the documents and make everything with your right hand so that your left dominant or your right dominant hand, whatever your dominant hand is available. He also said, and this is key, one of the things that we're seeing in this trial is that Officer DeCruz, it doesn't seem like there was a policy that he didn't violate. It's almost like he's a what would Valenza retard call it? The rebel. Yeah, so he's kind of a rebel because he doesn't seem to care what policies state. One of them was this blocking maneuver that he used to stop Michael Dean. They're taught, these officers, that you pull up behind a vehicle and you create that safe space and all that kind of stuff. But here he was pulling his vehicle in front of the suspect on the driver's side of the suspect. And the defense is trying to make it sound as if, well, he did that because he was afraid that the car would drive into the intersection there at a red light. So the blocking maneuver is not taught in any of the courses whatsoever, but yet that's what Carmen DeCruz used. Additionally, it's their policy that if you're involved in a pursuit, that you're supposed to call that out. At no time did Officer DeCruz make anyone aware on the radio. Oh, hey, I'll check that out also. That he was involved in any kind of a pursuit. In other words, he just engaged in a pursuit. But what came out over the radio was just a simple traffic call. And it wasn't until he stopped the vehicle that he called it in. And then at some point also said that supposedly the vehicle struck his vehicle, but there hasn't been any evidence of that, just DeCruz saying so. And you know how cops are when they're trying to cover themselves, they'll scream out things like, stop resisting, even though you haven't done anything at all, to make themselves look better in any situation. More officers equal less stress. This is another training point that was brought out. He says, generally when you stop a vehicle, when an officer stops a vehicle, especially at the end of a pursuit, officers are not trained to just walk up to that vehicle. There's so many risks inherent in officers immediately approaching a vehicle that they were just engaged in a pursuit with, because several factors. One, the officer is in a stressed position because he just got done all that high adrenaline chasing after a suspect. And then you've got the suspect has got a lot of adrenaline because he was just chased. You don't walk up there by yourself. At the very least, you get on your radio or your intercom system there. You order the driver out if that's what you got to do. But you wait for backup. And he says, more officers equal less stress. When you've got 4 officers and 1 suspect, there's less stress. And the reason that's important is because a stressed officer may take actions based on fear, not on rational thought. And that's kind of what seems to have happened here, is that we have an officer who put himself in a situation where he was afraid and highly stressed, and a man is now dead because of it. They are trained, not to run up. I said that. There was a policy at the time. This is yet another policy that DeCruz seems to have violated. That not only was in place but was reiterated shortly prior to this incident by Chief Floyd Mitchell, who, by the way, I really supported Floyd Mitchell as the police chief here in Temple, Texas, because he was bringing a lot of positive change to the department, and he was really bringing back trust and confidence in the department. And I think that's one of the reasons he sort of got run out, because there are some bad actors in TPD. One of them, I just found out literally today, it was Assistant Chief Tobin. Looks like he's finally retired. So in my estimation at this point, the only confirmed bad officer that I know about in Temple PD left now that Tobin is gone, because Tobin was just like an infestation, and he was at the leadership level, which, you know, when you've got a bad leader, you're going to have bad troops. But Sergeant Minix is the only guy I think that's left. But there was a policy in place that if a pursuit, you know, if a police officer, and this is still a policy today, if a police officer is trying to pull someone over for a busted tail light, expired insurance, or tags or whatever, and it's just a traffic stop, and that person takes off and a pursuit begins, the officer is to stop the pursuit immediately, because it is more dangerous to pursue someone over a traffic incident than it would be just to, you know, write them a traffic ticket. And the idea is the officer is supposed to peel off, stop the pursuit, and then, you know, the person might eventually get away. And the way that you continue that pursuit is simply over the radio. You know, if it's an issue, you call in the license plate, you get them later on a warrant, something like that. Really, just don't try to evade. All right, that's the first thing. But they're not supposed to. They're for traffic violations, which this started out as a traffic violation. This started out as a traffic violation because of a quota system, actually, according to DeCruz. So a man is dead because of a quota system and because of a traffic. So what they've been doing for the remainder of the morning was going over Temple PD policy number 307, which is vehicle pursuits. And that policy requires a, quote, high degree of common sense and sound judgment, which seems to be lacking here. And the policy also specifically says, hey, look, officers, if you're trying to pull someone over for a traffic violation and that vehicle begins to take off and there's a pursuit, you will not be disciplined. There's no discipline for a decision not to pursue a subject in such a case. So it's not like they have to worry about, well, crap, if I don't go after this guy and collect this revenue for the state, I'm going to get in trouble. Well, I mean, the policy is very clear that it says that there will not be any discipline for making such a decision. Apparently, there's not any discipline for killing people either, but that's beside the point. He said the policy, this is also something I wrote down that I thought was pretty interesting. A decision to apprehend a suspect at all costs has no place in law enforcement. This was Chief Mitchell's policy at the time, 2019. And I really liked the way that this said. Now, you know, sometimes I think that these policies are just in place as a way to say, look, this is our policy. He violated them, you know. And then behind the scenes, they're pretty much telling officers, hey, look, these things are just suggestions. Don't worry about it. I mean, you've got qualified immunity. We've got free attorneys. We've got union representation. We're just going to write these down just to protect ourselves. But hey, it does sound good, right? It sounds good. A decision to apprehend a suspect at all costs has no place in law enforcement. I agree with that. Now, whether or not that's truly the policy, in other words, just because it's written down doesn't mean it's policy. The unwritten policy could be to ignore the policy and, you know, just do your thing. We got your back kind of thing. Also learned that unmarked vehicles shall not engage in pursuits except in very narrow, rare circumstances. And those rare circumstances are there's no one else available except for this unmarked car. So, you know, it's funny. So unmarked vehicles shall not engage in pursuits. I don't think there should ever be an unmarked vehicle unless you're doing surveillance. As far as traffic goes, there is zero reason for an unmarked cop car to be engaged in traffic enforcement, because if the purpose of traffic enforcement is safety, what is the one thing people do when they see a police car, an obviously marked police car? Is they slow down or they pay attention, they start using their blinkers. In other words, they're quote unquote safer when they see a police car. So the idea behind an unmarked police car doing traffic has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with raising revenue. Because if your goal is to get people to slow down, then you would have a marked car where it can be easily seen. If your goal is to raise money, you would hide a marked car behind an object where people can't see you, or you would use an unmarked car, and that's called revenue raising, not traffic enforcement, in my view. And then, so they had done several training events, as a matter of fact, just 3 months prior to the shooting event, on pursuits and when you can and cannot pursue. That's been the testimony for today. As I said, the defense rested its case. As soon as the state rests its case, of course, the defense is going to have a chance to cross-examine the witnesses that the state's bringing up again. And the defense, I believe, will have another chance to call witnesses if they choose, but generally they don't, because it just creates a big back and forth. Was the testimony on his outburst after he shot him allowed? Yes, the outburst was allowed. That is an exception to the hearsay rule. And so that was allowed. There was a portion of that was not allowed. The only part that was not allowed was, this isn't the first time I fucked my career, or this is the first time I fucked my family, kind of thing. That was not allowed. It violates what's called the 403 balancing test, where relevant evidence, if it were to be presented, would its relevance would be outweighed by the prejudicial effect it would have on a jury. So even though evidence is relevant, if a single piece of evidence is going to so prejudice a jury, not about whether someone committed the crime, because obviously that's always relevant, but whether a bad act would, in this case, whether a bad act would prejudicially affect a jury against the defendant. And so that's the only thing that the witness was not allowed to testify to, was the outburst about this isn't the first time, because you're not allowed to use past acts on a present issue. And believe me, Officer DeCruz, you look up Temple Carmen DeCruz, and you're going to see some of the things that this guy has done. And it's long past time that this man saw some jail time, because an average citizen would have already been in jail. And had he been put in jail when he should have been put in jail, running over a kid and letting him burn underneath the vehicle, Michael Dean may not be dead today. So there's that. All right, guys, that's lunch. Case starts back again in about an hour. And this afternoon, I will bring you another update. Also, this afternoon or this evening, I'm going to be doing an interview today with a man who was unlawfully or wrongfully, whichever way you want to put it, was wrongfully incarcerated for 20 years for a crime he didn't commit. And now that he's out, the statute of limitations has run out on, there's a law in Texas that if you've been wrongfully incarcerated, you get some money, $80,000 a year for each year that you were wrongfully incarcerated. And because of the short statute of limitations, he's missed out on his ability to collect from the state on this money. And so I'm going to interview him, and we're going to try and raise some awareness of his case, because the legislature is in session right now, and we need the law to change. I think the statute of limitations should be 1 year for every year of incarceration. And, this 2 years of, I think it's either 2 or 3 years statute of limitations, when you're trying to deal with the effects of getting out of jail, getting your life back together, you might not even be aware that this law is out there, which was the case here, until after the statute of limitations expires. So I'm going to be interviewing him. Pay attention to this channel. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notifications button, so that when I do create the video template for this interview, at least you're notified. But look for it around 6 p.m. tonight. And then about 4:30 or so is when I'll be doing my part 2 of today's testimony. Apparently there's a juror that's got some previous engagements or something that he's got to do. He's got to be there at 5. So the judge said they're going to try and get out of there by 4:30. So about 4:30 or so, I'll be giving the update for the afternoon's testimony in the DeCruz trial. And then about 6 o'clock, I will be doing that interview with James. And so pay attention to this channel for that. And I'm going to want you to contact your representatives about this. So yes, I agree. There should be no statute of limitations. You're absolutely right, especially when you spend 20 years in prison for a crime you didn't commit, and it was DNA evidence that exonerated you. So it's obvious that it wasn't you. I can't believe that we have the law the way. And I've looked at everything I possibly could to find a way to file this on his behalf. And the only option that we have is a change in the law at this point. There is another option. I'm not going to give it away yet. We'll talk about that in the video tonight that I believe we can use. But it's a long shot. It's a long shot. So anyway, pay attention to this channel, and I will see y'all a little bit later this afternoon. I should have 2 more videos this afternoon for y'all, both very interesting. Carmen DeCruz trial and the James Long case, being improperly incarcerated. Y'all take care, be safe, and be free as always.